Hey everyone, welcome to Notebook Summaries. Today, we're diving into the incredible history of the Maldives, an island nation whose story is as deep and dynamic as the ocean that has shaped its destiny for thousands of years.
So let's start with the big question. How on earth did this nation of nearly 1,200 tiny islands become such a critical geopolitical hotspot? Well, a huge part of the answer is simple. Location, location, location. For centuries, these islands have been sitting right at the crossroads of major sea routes. You could say their geography has always been their destiny, transforming them from an ancient trade hub into a modern strategic prize. To really get the full picture, we're going to break this story down into 4 key chapters. We'll start with its early days as an ancient crossroads, then look at a huge shift in faith and the arrival of foreign powers. After that, we'll cover its journey to becoming an independent republic, and finally, dive into its more recent and pretty intense democratic struggle.
Okay, part 1, Ancient Crossroads. Let's roll the clock back, way back. We're talking more than 2,500 years ago. Long before this place was a tourist paradise, it was a magnet for seafaring settlers from all over the region who laid the very foundations of this unique island kingdom.
So you can see the foundational building blocks right here. Around 500 BC, you have the first folks arriving from India and Sri Lanka. Then a couple centuries later, Buddhism takes root, and it becomes the absolute core of the culture for over 1,000 years. And then, bam! In the 12th century, a king named Kumaila comes along and unites all these scattered islands into a single kingdom.
And, it's easy to think of islands as being totally isolated, but that just wasn't the case here. The first people to arrive were expert sailors. Later on, Sinhalese settlers from Sri Lanka showed up, and their language would become the basis for modern Devehi. It was a true cultural melting pot, and we know they were trading with places as far away as ancient Rome and China. Pretty incredible, right? Now get this, the most valuable thing the Maldives was exporting back then wasn't some spice or precious metal. It was these little things, cowrie shells. They had tons of them, and for centuries, these shells were used as actual money all across Asia and Africa. Think about that. This tiny island kingdom became a surprisingly vital player in ancient global trade, all thanks to a seashell. Okay, on to part 2, Face and Foreign Rule. This is where a profound religious shift is about to completely redefine Maldivian identity, and it happens right as powerful foreign empires start setting their sights on these strategically crucial islands. This era was really defined by 2 massive transformations. First, the arrival of Islam, which is still the cornerstone of the national identity today. And second, a long and very difficult struggle for autonomy against a whole series of European colonial powers. You really can't overstate how huge this was. The conversion to Islam in 1153 is arguably the single most important event in the nation's history. It reshaped everything: the laws, the culture, the language of administration. The Sultanate system that was set up at this time would go on to last for over 800 years. But foreign powers soon came knocking. The Portuguese occupation was brutal, but it also gave rise to one of the Maldives' greatest national heroes, Muhammad Thakurafanu. He and his brothers waged this brilliant guerrilla war, island hopping at night to fight the occupiers. His victory is still celebrated on the Maldives National Day, a powerful story of local resilience against a global superpower. After the Portuguese, the Maldives had to skillfully navigate the ambitions of other empires, like the Dutch. Eventually, it was the British who formalized a relationship in 1887. The deal made the Maldives a protectorate. This meant Britain handled foreign relations and defense, but, and this is the crucial part, the Sultanate was allowed to keep managing its own internal affairs. It was a strategic move that preserved a degree of Maldivian autonomy. Now we jump into the 20th century for part 3, an independent republic. And what a whirlwind. This era brings full independence, the end of an 853-year-old monarchy, and the immense challenges of building a modern nation out of a string of tiny islands. Gaining independence from Britain in 1965 was obviously a huge step, but it was just the beginning. The country had to figure out what it wanted to be. After a brief failed attempt at a republic in 1953, the monarchy was permanently abolished for good in 1968, setting the stage for the modern era of presidential rule. And this new era was dominated by just 2 men for its first 40 years. You had Ibrahim Nasir, who pushed for modernization, like opening the first international airport, He was followed by Mamun Abdul Gayoom, who, as you can see from this chart, ruled for a whopping 30 years. He oversaw the massive growth of the tourism industry, but that progress came at a cost. His government also heavily suppressed political dissent, which set the stage for a lot of conflict down the road. And here we go again, geography as destiny. When the British left their air base on Gan Island in 1976, it was a major strategic prize. The Soviet Union immediately tried to lease it, but the Maldives' refusal was a really significant moment, asserting its non-aligned stance right in the thick of the Cold War. And that brings us to our final chapter, Part 4, the democratic struggle. The 21st century unleashes this wave of unprecedented change, from a devastating natural disaster to a turbulent, often chaotic fight for democracy and a brand new geopolitical contest for influence. The 2004 tsunami was an absolute catastrophe. The economic damage was just staggering. 62% of the country's GDP wiped out. But beyond the numbers, it caused immense human suffering and laid bare just how extremely vulnerable the nation is to the forces of nature, a threat that looms larger than ever today. In the early 2000s, discontent with President Gayoom's long rule finally boiled over. Protests sparked by a death in custody created this unstoppable momentum for democratic reform. It all culminated in the historic 2008 election, the country's first real multi-party vote, which ended 3 decades of one-man rule. But, as this chaotic timeline shows, the road to a stable democracy was really just beginning. I mean, look at this. The years since 2008 have seen a dizzying, rapid-fire change in leadership. From Mohammed Nasheed, the first democratically elected president who became a global climate activist, remember that famous underwater cabinet meeting? To all the subsequent presidents, each one has represented a dramatically different vision for the country's future and, crucially, who its friends should be. And this gets us right to the heart of the modern struggle playing out today. It's a high-stakes balancing act, pivoting between the traditional regional power, India, and the rising global influence of China. With each election, the nation's entire foreign policy can shift, making the Maldives a critical barometer for power in the Indian Ocean. So this brings us to the final, and maybe the most crucial question. For a nation that has weathered empires and navigated global power struggles, how will it weather the rising seas? The greatest challenge facing the Maldives today might not come from a political rival, but from the ocean itself. And this existential threat brings the whole story full circle, right back to the one constant in Maldivian history: its beautiful but incredibly vulnerable geography. Thanks for joining us on this historical journey. If you enjoyed this explainer, be sure to explore our other quick country histories in the playlist and subscribe to Notebook Summaries to keep learning with us.